way. That's why I'm using this Carnival term, which I'm also going to propose as a method of reacting to this. I'm going to present some of the images, basically, some of the gestures and the bodies engaged politically, in order to see how the discourse, the public discourse of nationalism, conflict and violence, can also be translated theatrically into scenes and bodies which influence people very much. So it's the influence of images which is here considered. So I'm starting with Carnivalizing the Frontier, and which is political practices and possible pacifist response. I think that these skirmishes, these inscenations, these provocations at the frontier do not seem extremely serious at the first sight, but I'm sure that the persistence of these scenes in the media can really influence people and make them think in terms of violent solution of any possible problem. And frontiers, of course, are the question that are interesting for everybody, and the question of departing, sharing, and ours and yours is deeply embedded into the cultures of these regions. So I think, even if they are extremely comical sometimes, they represent a real political danger, and also they can inflict the so-called mentality of people, and they can really make people more prone to vote, even formally, for violent solutions. So these are the scenes of actions. Several Slovenian politicians have used the opportunity to be beaten or pushed by Croatian frontier officers, and you can imagine of the investment into the political career. There's also a person whose house has a non-clear position between the two frontiers, and this person is obviously could be an object of debate on human rights. But unfortunately, this is slightly lost in political manipulation of the problem. So I'm presenting some of the things. You will see men, basically, flags, bodies, repression being played out, and so on and so on. All at the frontier, Slovenian, Croatian frontier. Okay, so you can see how important the staging is and how it can affect people who are watching it, especially if there's no debate about the value of the information. More action. There's police engaged on both sides. In fact, when you look at these scenes, you have the impression that something really important is the issue. But in fact, we sometimes call it the war of sardines, which is fighting about those fish, 4 fish who have remained in this shallow area. So, but once you have confrontations and discourses of this kind, which I'm going to preserve, you start to ask yourself a question. Can you deny this? And this is on the Slovenian side. This is Slovenia, says the banner. And the Croatian. This is Croatia, says the banner. Can you open a debate? Can you put a list of questions? No, you can't. So we are confronted with a kind of mute response to this, and that's where I think women should do something about it. Not only because it's boys' fun, but also because it's a serious problem which is introducing politics of violence. So when I will not engage in any historical explanation, but to the stereotypal level of thinking about the past, and I'm asking the question, is he the only one to blame? Is he the main fish in the game? For those who do not recognize, that's a former President Tito, who is supposedly guilty for everything that is going on some 30 years after he died. More. Or they are always prepared. And I'm thinking here about cultural manifestations of violence and aggression, which are in every culture, but which in some moments really produce the so-called effect of brutalization or the readiness to solve problems in a violent way, like the hunting. Here are the Croatian men in uniform after having killed some 100 wild boars and other animals. So hunting is one of these phenomena. And the other is the Slovenian villagers from Ambrus heading in a lynching party against one Roma family. This happened 2 years ago, and unfortunately it was taken by the media in such a way that the former president of Slovenia, Janez Drnovšek, who unfortunately prematurely died recently, was one of the rare people who went there and intervened in a very humanist fashion, and was in fact first embedded to approach the Roma family, and then offended and treated as a second kind of citizen, and he was at that moment the president of Slovenia. So it's unbelievable, but it really happened in Slovenia. So hunting to racism, you have the huge, vast panorama of possible manifestations of aggression and violent solutions that are everywhere in both countries. A bit of Carnival history. I was joking about the war of sardines, but there's something connecting sardines and Carnival, and that is the practice of Venetian Carnival from the 16th century on, and some other carnivals in Europe, which end in a kind of comic festivity of ritual of funeral of the sardine, which is the spirit of the carnival. So the funeral of sardine, there's even a French novel, Le Funérailles de la Sardine, and so on and so on. So this is something that is embedded in European cultural history, carnival and sardines together. This is the end of the carnival, and you see that's how it looks. People having death costumes, and this is the final scene, the funeral of a sardine, which you see in its coffin here, and that's the symbolic end of the carnival. Yes, the carnival ends like this, and the political carnival ends very often like this, as we know it very well. So, what would be the response? There were some responses which I would like to present to you if you're not familiar with them. That was the Lysistrata project in 2003, a woman refusing the helmet, made by American activists from off Broadway, who, in fact, thanks to internet, managed to spread this action all around the planet on one day, March 3rd, that was the beginning of the war in Iraq. And that was their response and the planet's response to the war in Iraq. So all around the planet, women basically, but also many men, were performing, reading, debating about one sole text, and that is the comedy Lysistrata by Aristophanes, who was first presented, who had its premiere in Athens in 5th century BC. And it's a comedy about women of Athens making contact and treaty with women of Sparta and trying to stop the war between Sparta and Athens by putting men under impossible conditions of a sexual strike. So this is a comedy, this is a very specific political Athenian democratic comedy, and it ends happily. Yes, men cannot stand anymore, and they make peace. So this was a project that was accompanying the Iraqi war. That's one of the posters. In a small theater in Missouri, in the state of Missouri, that was the poster for the performance of Lysistrata, make love, not war. A repetition of a very old slogan from the 60s. Except for this feminist, or feminist-led intervention or response to the war, there's a very traditional one which is still being kept in Western Europe and in the United States as a kind of marginal satire parodic tradition, which is very old and never fades away, but is so small that it doesn't really have any influence to larger masses of people. This is a kind of underground